in order for it to be considered faith-based, there's an acknowledgement of God.
Okay.
And so sometimes that might even be in one scene and but or it might be the entire thing revolving around it. So there's quite a spectrum even within that. But yes, there's an acknowledgement of God, and that's where it kind of moves into the faith-based realm.
Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hersh.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
In the hot seat today on Yes Brand is Jaclyn Whitt. Jaclyn is the co-director of Family Friendly Screenwriting Academy. She's a multi-award winning screenwriter with 2 features in pre-production, on the cusp of the 3rd, and a sitcom also in pre-production. She and her husband, Jeff, and the director are the directors of Family Friendly Screenwriting Academy. And it's focused on educating and mentoring writers in the family friendly and faith-based genres. Please welcome Jaclyn Whitt to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So Jaclyn, tell me how you got started in writing to begin with.
Well, I think things we do when we're children really are things we should pay attention to. And I actually started writing scripts when I was literally 11 years old. It was just for fun. I don't even think I shared it with anyone. And through my high school years, I would write little scripts for school or church or whatever, just having fun, on the stage. And then when I was in my early 20s, I had an idea for a story that I wanted to write. And just to clarify, I would say 98% of the time, if I had an idea for a story, I wanted to write it as a script, not as a short story, or sometimes it was poetry. I did do a lot of songwriting, but there's just something about a script that for me, I can see it come alive. But I realized up until that point, I'd only written scripts for a stage or radio. And so at this point, I realized this particular idea I had would only work for the screen. So I thought, I guess I better learn how to write a screenplay. And that's kind of the way I look at life, is like, well, I guess I better learn this now.
Yeah, which is a great way to approach things. And I, as I told you before we started recording, I relate very much to how you started. I think I was 12. I was 12 when I wrote my first screenplay. And I was always trying to find people to either act the stuff out or film it, even though this was like before cell phones and we even shot on film, on Super 8 film. And I would write, some kind of any opportunity to write a script, I would write it. But just like you, I was only interested in screenplays. I'm only now writing my first book, but it was like screenplays is the language that I spoke in. And I think that's how you feel. You can see it, you know that it kind of demands a second life, beyond the page. Right. And what about the family films? We'll talk about some of the stuff we have in common there, but tell me about the family and faith-based world and your interest in that. Okay.
So it's not just screenwriting. That's my passion. That's one of them. But I also am a person of faith, and I love family movies. And so I decided, okay, well, I'm going to write what I love. And so that is the area that I write in. But then I had this idea for mentorship programs, and I've taken a lot of classes and other programs in the screenwriting atmosphere, and I'm always assigned to watch either TV shows or movies that are ones that are actually outside of my own value system. And so I wouldn't want to actually watch them. And I thought there's got to be a way to teach this stuff without having to ask people to go outside of their value system. And so our entire program is not just that we, empower people to write family friendly and faith-based movies, but we actually, our entire approach is this way where you could have your 12-year-old in the room or your mom in the room or whatever while you're doing your homework or watching the class. Like while we can talk about difficult things, there's that line that we don't cross where we don't actually engage in viewing certain things. So like, for example, let's say if I wanted to write a movie about a stripper, well, she's got to have a pretty gritty life. It doesn't mean that I can't write about it, but I don't need to actually show her while she's working. We know that that's part of what she does, and we can get into the deeper aspects of her life. And so this is kind of our approach when we're teaching the family friendly aspect. It's not to say that every movie is for every age, but that we understand like there are boundaries. And I mean, that when you create something in film, it's a very collaborative effort. And so when I'm writing, I'm not just writing from my own imagination. I have to keep in mind that there's going to be actors that are going to be portraying these characters that I'm writing. There's directors that are going to have to direct it. And so within my own value system, like I need to respect that there are other people coming to this project that I wouldn't ask them to do something I wouldn't do myself. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the story and the depth of it. So there is a balance with that.
Yeah, and balance is a great word. What comes to mind as you're speaking is that when there are no boundaries, sometimes a project can lose its focus or its intent. When I was younger, I was raised in a religious household, an Orthodox Jewish household. And so the kind of material that I would watch or that I would write would be somewhat limited, and I thought of it that way. I thought, oh, it's limited. I can't do this or I can't do that. And then when I went to film school, I could do anything I wanted, right? And I could use profanity. I could use ideas of, and I would watch the stuff. I would see the stuff that all the other students were doing. But what I found was as I got older, and even with stand-up comedy, which I also do, I was like, I can do it. I can say anything I want. But I remembered something my father told me about comedians and about movies too. He said, sometimes people use profanity when they can't think of anything better to do. When the idea isn't strong enough, they pepper it with profanity. Yeah. And sometimes it creates a limitation of its own because you just don't really get the story out in a way that grabs anyone's attention because it's shocking, true, but it isn't imaginative. And so when you were talking about, covering the life of a stripper or delving into the life of a stripper, it forces you in a way to use your imagination to get serious about the person's life or subject matter and not focus on the sensational aspect of it.
And it can be a deeper story too, because she's a whole person, right? Like there's a lot more to her than just this particular thing that she happens to do for her work, which, why did she end up doing that? Like there's a lot of questions that can come with that. And so with that, there's actually a lot of story that can be developed, a lot of character that can be developed. And so aside from seeing what she does, we can totally fall in love with this character and want to see her succeed and want to see her achieve her goal, whatever that ends up being, apart from actually seeing what she does.
Yeah. And there are movies I can think of that have had a very strong message. Moral always sounds like it's a judgment. The word moral always sounds like it's some kind of judgment. All it really is what's going to make someone a happier, healthier person. And if you think about these professions, I mean, my wife produced a documentary called Pleasure for Sale. It was for HBO, I believe, or no, maybe it was Sundance Channel. I don't want to say HBO. I think it might have been the Sundance Channel, but it was the directors were Joe and Harry Gantz, who are known for their documentaries. And she spent a lot of time with women who were prostitutes, in Vegas, which is where it's legal in Nevada, in Nevada. And it was fascinating because there wasn't nudity, there wasn't sex in the documentary, there wasn't any of this, but these were real people with real lives and stuff that was really happening. But it was mostly the things around the profession. Right. Not that it was not for a mature audience, which was another thing I was going to ask you, because when you think about family films, there's obviously different kinds of films, faith-based films. There's different kinds. Tell me about some of the genres that you teach and work in.
Well, we could teach a variety of genres. It's more so from the concept of teaching people how to, because writers is where it all starts, right? So we have the responsibility to build the blueprint. And so within that, we need to keep in mind who all is involved in this process after it leaves our hands. So, for example, The Passion of the Christ, I think is rated R. Right. That's a wholly violent film, right? But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be made. And, one of my films, it's actually about this guy who's running away from loan sharks. He gets involved with a biker club. There's a lot of fighting in that one. But again, there's a lot of life that happens, but there's no profanity and there's no nudity or, things like that. But that things have happened. Mm-hmm. And so the story is quite deep, and I wouldn't recommend it for a young audience. But at the same time, if a child walked in the room, it's not like you're going to be scrambling to turn it off to hope that they didn't see anything that's going to scar them.
Yeah. What do you think of the the Motion Picture Association's rating system? Do you feel that those those rating systems are pretty effective, accurate? What are your thoughts?
Well, what's interesting is that because things are becoming so desensitized. I know you said earlier, using dropping the F-bomb in comedy or whatever, that is shocking. Well, it's not anymore, right? It gets thrown around like it's nothing. And anyway, so it's funny because if you watch something that, let's say it was rated R in the 90s, what's that one with Michelle Pfeiffer and the class? She goes to teach. Dangerous Minds. Okay. So Dangerous Minds rated R. If you watch that movie today, it would probably be rated PG. Yeah. PG-13 at the most. I think it was rated R because there was so much foul language in it. Because I watched it with my son because I wanted him to see something. Because what they did actually in that program, if you pay attention, it starts out with them using a lot of foul language because they lacked the vocabulary. As they continue to grow in their vocabulary and in their hope and maturity and everything like that, as that grows, their vocabulary changes. And so throughout the film, there's less and less profanity. So I wanted him to see that even in a Hollywood film, they're going to express how people that are uneducated are going to use foul language more so than people who are educated. And so it was a great example for that. But my point is that in the 90s, that was rated R. Today, that would not be rated R. It would probably be PG-13. And so the rating system, because it's changing, it's hard to really even know what it's referring to now. I mean, you can look at it and you can be like, okay, and it'll say it's rated this because of violence or because of sexual situations or because of this or that. And it's still kind of hard to know exactly what it means, especially since if you're looking on something like Netflix or Amazon or something like that, where you've got movies from the 70s, you've got movies from, this year. The rating it's really hard to understand what it actually means because the ratings from the movies in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they remain what they were at the time, but they would not be that today.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking through decades and decades of films, there's definitely been an arc of, what was shocking and what was acceptable, but also what the power of the film's is as well. I mean, I feel like in a way there are, and to the point about, streamers, yeah, they have a whole other system, and it's like, it'll say TVM or mature themes or sexual situations and drug use and whatever. It does tell you, it tells
I
you as a
prefer
parent
that,
what,
yeah.
yeah. What were you going to say?
Oh, yeah, I prefer, like, if they actually state what the issue is, like,
Yeah.
because if it's for sexual situations, well, then you know what you're getting into. If it's for profanity, you know what you're getting into, right? So I kind of feel like they should almost compartmentalize it further rather than just giving us like an age that somebody arbitrarily decided this is probably appropriate for this age. Because maybe it's not for different families that have different ideas of what's, appropriate. Like some people, maybe at 8 years old, they're used to watching things that are meant to be for teenagers and up. And then other kids where it's like they're 17 and they still haven't watched that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to pick a number and to just arbitrarily say like, I think this is the right maturity level. Well, you don't know.
Yeah, that's really
telling us what's in it.
Yeah, Jaclyn, that's a really good point. People are different, and sometimes parents. I agree with that. As a parent, each one of my kids has had different tastes, totally different tastes. Like I have 5 kids. There's literally five different tastes. It doesn't mean there aren't movies they like to see together, or that there aren't movies that we can find to watch together, but their tastes of what they really like and what they want to watch more frequently than not is very different, not just because of their ages. And they are all different ages, but as they hit different milestones, their tastes were completely different and continue to be. What do you think about, there are films that would be really valuable for someone to watch, but it may not reflect their life experience. In other words, if someone's growing up somewhere where there is where there's drug use, there's sexual situations, that they're exposed to things. Let's put it that way. They're exposed to things not through media, but just in the world that they're living in. They're exposed to things that might be considered too graphic for some of the material that you put out, and yet you'd want them to see the film you're making because it might be good. It might have an impact for them, and they might enjoy it and benefit from it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that with what we're doing, and especially in the family friendly genre, and actually the faith-based genre, there's actually, these doors are busting wide open. It's not just to say that like the movies are doing well from, a business perspective, which they are. They're actually doing hugely well.
Yeah.
However, there seems to be this understanding of moving away from having this perfect life because you believe in God to having like, okay, God can step into your reality, whatever that is, and it's going to look different for different people. So we need to have a variety of life experiences that are expressed on the screen so that we can see, how does God involve himself in that kind of situation?
Yeah.
If we truly believe that God is, that God loves everyone and that he wants to be involved in everyone's life, well, that means we need to accept that like these kids that are maybe living in these very difficult situations, like God is there with them. So what does that look like? How do we portray that?
Yeah.
And so it is definitely like the movie Sound of Freedom that just came out recently. That one, it's definitely not something that you would want your children to see. However, there may be children that have been in situations that they need to understand that like they know the reality already, right?
Yeah.
And so for them to see that there are people that see them, that understand what they're going through and want to help them and other children in that situation, I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah. That I love that point you made about, God's supposed to be everywhere. God is everywhere. If God is in all these situations, and if the people who are in these situations need that, they need to be lifted out of it. Clearly the situation isn't what they want. It's not drugs. It could be anything. There are so many things that are dangerous in the world, and these may be situations they didn't even put themselves in, obviously, if they're children, but the presence of God in those situations means that there's a connection, and a value. I like films where you like, I think back to Oh God with George Burns, years and years ago, but it was a huge hit. And it was, God, I don't know if you've seen the film. Have you seen the film?
We haven't.
Okay. Definitely worth checking out. It was so long ago. As I mentioned it, it's like hard because I was a kid. So, I mean, it has to be 40 years ago. I don't even know. But it was like, the idea of it was that God had come back to, it starred George Burns and John Denver, the country singer. And God had appeared to him. He was just a regular guy. And God had appeared to him and chosen him to kind of bring a more, godly or godlike message to the world because things were just a mess. And it was just a very simple concept, but there was something about it that really worked for people because it touched on real life. It was obviously, I don't know if it was rated G or PG. Maybe, today it would be rated G, like to your point earlier, but certainly it was a family film. It was absolutely a family film, but it was so funny and so touching and so well put together that I feel the notion that God was among us in a way that most people couldn't see was the basic idea. And try telling people that God isn't happy. And obviously as someone who studied the Bible and knows the stories of prophets and what they went through and what is always a challenge, that movie wasn't a new concept to me, but it was presented in a new way. What are some of your favorite films that inspired you? You mentioned earlier that you had seen some great films as a youngster, but like what were some of the movies that inspired you that you loved at the time, the earliest that you can remember?
It's interesting because a lot of them aren't even necessarily faith-based, but for some reason it's like my heart saw God in it. And I guess that is, when that providence is happening and a lot of the time I can attribute that to God, right? But so for example, like even the movie Dangerous Minds, like it came out when I was a teenager and it was really controversial at the time, but like I did watch it with my friends. I was not really allowed to, but I'll tell you that what I learned from that though is that because it is based on a true story. And so this woman that is put in this position where she's completely out of her element, she doesn't give up on what she's been called to do. Mm-hmm. And then she's able to find success. And so things like that really spoke to me. And those are the kinds of films that I want to write, like the situations where like people are completely out of their element, but they're able to find that hope and inspiration. And because they don't give up, they're able to actually achieve something, but there's a struggle involved. And I think that, we all love to cheer for the underdog, but there's something else when I watch television shows or movies. A lot of the time, the ones that I'm drawn to are the ones where people are struggling with like just real life. Maybe they're struggling with their own failings or faults or whatever, but sometimes just life is hard.
Yeah.
And so to be able to have a story that's inspiring because somebody pushed through, like the other one with Will Smith that his son was in was so bad.
Happiness.
Pursuit of Happiness.
Pursuit of Happiness.
And again, based on a true story. I love based on a true story film because you can't just attribute it to, well, the screenwriter decided to make this happen. No, like that actually happened. Like this person actually started in this place and ended up in this place. That's incredible.
Well, in both of those examples you cited, they're based on things that really happened, right? Mm-hmm. So, what about movies that are fantasy or at least, there are movies that, and I think both those movies aren't faith-based, what you would call faith-based movies. And are there faith-based movies that don't overtly mention God or those like they cover themes, but they take it out of the religious.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why when my husband and I decided to start this academy that we're running, instead of making it just faith-based, that's why we wanted to include the family friendly. That was kind of what we came up with for that, because there are a lot of films where it's pursuing something that, as far as we're concerned, that's something that's on God's heart.
Right.
It may not mention God, but it's about forgiveness or,
Right.
something like that, where there's definitely value in there that I feel like God would be able to respect that project, even though it doesn't necessarily talk about him in it.
Right. And it's funny because I think about it as a writer, I've delved into things where I've played with those tropes or archetypes. They're really more archetypes. Some are tropes. I mean, where, I'm playing on what people's perceptions of God, devil, heaven, hell, and usually comedy, because that's my thing that I've mostly written in, although I've written, in other genres. But I've played with those things. So there's a genre of film that plays on the themes that we're familiar with, and they could be very mainstream movies, or they could be darker movies, or who knows what, but they're playing on themes that we know of. And then there are the ones like you just described where, they're not overtly about religion. Religion is not the subject. Humanity is the subject. Human beings and their struggles and the answers that they sometimes come up with are the thing, right?
Yeah.
Do you think sometimes, like, because when you say faith-based, right? If it says faith-based, then you're right, it is a huge market. And I think that's ultimately fantastic. It's not because of my beliefs one way or another, beyond just my beliefs of people having the opportunity to be more positive, to make contributions to the world that are healthier and better for the world, and just all of those things that any person could have a feeling about humanity. Do you think that sometimes the goal is for the audience to not even have to know, like, you know what I mean? Like, where can it cross over in a way?
Okay, so I think in order for it to be considered faith-based, there's an acknowledgement of God.
Okay.
And so sometimes that might even be in one scene or it might be the entire thing revolving around it. So there's quite a spectrum even within that. But yes, there's an acknowledgement of God, and that's where it kind of moves into the faith-based realm. And sometimes it can be, like straddling the fence of a few different genres, but it does go in that direction. But so here's actually, I was thinking about this, and it's good you have a background, with the Bible. So the 10 Commandments, okay? So the first 5 commandments are about respecting authority, and the last 5 are about respecting, your community, right? Yeah. And so if we're writing from those, like maybe sometimes we're writing from the side where we're respecting authority and, we're honoring God or learning how to walk with God or whatever you might want to say. But then sometimes our focus is on the second half, where it's like, this is how we're going to interact with community. This is how we learn how to respect each other. And we learn how to, stuff our own pride so that we can actually, bring honor to our own community. And so this is why you don't necessarily have to approach both sides, the 2 tablets at the same time. Right.
Well, it's also, it's well and good for us to talk about, even me, positivity and themes that are, universal and all of that. But as you try to be creative and as you start to write stories, as you know, often take their own path, and they kind of write themselves in a lot of ways. In some ways, that's, we're writing it, but that's kind of the magic of it. That's the fun of it, is when the characters start to leap off the page. That's maybe why you and I like screenplays and screenwriting so much, because you hear them speak. It's not in a book. It's not flat. And so that dimension sometimes takes on its own forms. What about when you bump up against themes that maybe controversial when they're put on a table, next to God and religion, and it could be anything from evolutionary concepts to scientific concepts, climate change, like global warming, things like that. And I don't know but they could be practical daily things that yet have there's a religious opinion. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that film is a great way to explore that, because sometimes, let's say if you and I have a difference of opinion about something, and so we start talking about it, we end up basically in a debate where it's like somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, or we're just both going to lose. So film is different because now it's something outside of us. And now we can watch something that has maybe some opinion that's expressed in it, or even if it's just like trying to understand something. So there's this journey that happens. Well, then you and I can discuss this journey that's outside of us, and we can have opinions about it. But it's like, instead of us starting on opposite sides of an issue, we're starting on the same side, looking at something that we just both experienced.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting point of view. I want to talk a little bit before we kind of circle back or wrap it up. It's really fascinating talking to you. I'm really enjoying it. So there were a couple things. One is, I'm interested in is Jeff, your husband, a screenwriter as well? And no. Okay. Well, you'll tell me a little bit about him then and what his role is. And then also, I want to hear about the mentorship programs that you're going to be launching this fall.
Okay, great. Yeah. So my husband actually, he was painting for years, and, he's getting older. His body was not, working so well with it anymore. And so he was like trying to figure out something he could do that he could use his brain instead of his body. But he's been very supportive of me pursuing screenwriting. And actually, he was part of the reason why I decided to pursue it as a career, because it was just something I did for myself for decades. I find it very therapeutic. And so I was sharing some of my scripts with him when we got married, which was almost 10 years ago. And he said, these are really great stories. Like, you should pursue this as a career. And so then I found a mentor, and, the rest is history from there. But about a year and a half ago, I came to him and I said, I have this idea for a program that could actually help screenwriters get further in their process than in a short amount of time than it took me. And teaching is one of those things that I've just always ended up doing. Like I said, like, pay attention to what you end up doing a lot, right? And so I always end up in a position of leadership and teaching. And so mentorship is something that comes very naturally to me. And so when I shared my idea with him, he said, well, yeah, that sounds great. And I was like, I don't have time to do it though. I'm like, because I was too busy with just writing my own projects.
Right.
And, so like, because starting a business, like, there's the whole business side of things that's not even about what you're actually doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So he decided he's going to take on the business part of it. So he deals with he runs the website, does all the administration, all of that stuff. So I just basically show up and teach. I do some of the marketing too, but yeah, like most of what I do is I'm the face. I'm the one that actually talks about I teach stuff, but I also hire other screenwriters to come in and do workshops and things like that.
Right. Well, speaking of the marketing, you touched on that a little bit. Obviously, on Yes Brand, we talk about the marketing of the companies. We, sometimes the funny thing is that in order to do really good marketing, in my opinion, it isn't so much about talking about what your brand is. It's being the brand. It's living the brand and doing the work and the stuff, just kind of, knowing how to talk about it, not saying it all the time.
Yes.
What are you doing? And I know you're new, you were just launched this in the beginning of the year, this particular venture. So how are you going about letting people know about it? Obviously, being on a podcast helps. That's usually the first answer. Well, doing the show, stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been making videos also, like short videos, reels on YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. And it's more of a recent thing because we didn't have the space to really make these videos until just the last few weeks. And so then I've been like making tons, but yeah, that's basically how we've been doing it and reaching out to the people that I already know. You know, being a screenwriter in the faith-based community already, I have a lot of connections with other, you know, producers, writers, actors, and things like that. So when I put it out there like, hey, I'm going to be teaching an introductory class. Anybody want to learn about screenwriting? It's a 7-week crash course kind of thing. That one's called Screenwriting Foundations. And I put it out there just to see, like, I wasn't even planning to teach that class. I just put it out there because people were asking me like, how hard is it to write a screenplay? And so I ended up with like 17 people sign up for the first class that I did. And that was just because I put it out to an actors group on Facebook, like, hey, if anybody wants to take this class, sign up.
Right.
So,
Well, actors are having done some of that, you know, are so willing to learn most of the time. You know, the one of the most fun things about acting is that it's like, there isn't one thing you can do that isn't learning. And I guess if you get good enough at it, then it's teaching. And I relate to that, the idea that, you know, I've started teaching recently, mentoring. I think mentoring and even teaching sometimes isn't something that you think of as a profession. You think of it as giving back or contributing or perpetuating, but it is a thing that you just kind of end up doing, and it can be some of the most rewarding stuff that you do. And as far as communicating and building your audience, have you cultivated the email kind of correspondence yet? Is that already underway?
yes, we've been growing our email list, but that one also took us a while to figure out how. I started working with someone who was able to teach me what that middle part was, which I guess we needed a proper funnel.
Yeah, sure.
And so now we've got that going. So I've got, like, you know, the free PDF giveaway to get you started on certain things for the different groups, because we have this approach where we have a program called Book to Screen. This is one of our mentorship programs we're starting in the fall.
Oh,
so this
okay,
is
good. I'm glad we segued into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
This is specifically for authors that are already published, so that with their published IP, they can actually take that and move, like, to make that into a screenplay. Because if they just go and pitch their book to a producer, let's say the producer loves it, they're going to say, great, I'll put a writer on it. And you know, right away, they're going to lose half their credit.
Yeah.
So if they learn how to write the screenplay themselves, and not just learn how to do it, but have the mentorship along the way, so that they know by the end of it, they've got a solid screenplay. If they pitch to a producer might bring a writer on for polishing or a few other things. But if they already have a working script that's actually doing really well and maybe even winning awards, like, their likelihood of maintaining their credit in the process of it getting produced is way higher than them just, you know, going to the producer and saying, well, I think I could probably write it myself. That will never happen.
No. Yeah. And the preconception is, and it's simply that, to circle back around to our original conversation starter here, is that it just wasn't their thing to write it as a screenplay. They just didn't see it as a movie. They started within their own imagination or their mind or their storytelling. And it's just about learning those principles. I like, we both wrote when we were 11, 12 years old, but I studied, I read the books, I read, Story by Robert McKee, and I read all the screenwriters, Sid Field, and I read, I read
the screenwriting Bible cover to cover.
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
See, there's more than one Bible, and I see that would be a good marketing campaign for the screenwriting Bible. There's the Bible you study and the Bible you write, and that's basically the only way to learn. But I think arming authors with the ability to adapt, and we could list any number of best-selling authors that have had a lot of success adapting, for the screen, and maybe they don't want to do it all the time, but it's better to be their choice than
Right,
to,
exactly.
so let's leave the audience with one thought that you would like to kind of have them take away with them.
Okay, so I know screenwriting seems like such a mystical kind of thing where people think like it's this really crazy idea or whatever, but they maybe have an idea for a movie. Writing a screenplay is not actually as hard as you may think. And to be honest, I think it's easier than writing a novel. There's a lot less words. So if it's something you've considered, it's worth looking into. And especially for teenagers, that's our other program that we're launching.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes,
before they're gone.